Hello, my name is Hakim Harriman and I'm here today with Dr. Crina Viju-Miljusevic of Carleton University to talk about the Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union. Why is the Common Agricultural Policy such an important policy in the EU?
So the Common Agriculture Policy was one of the first European policies introduced in a time when the events and the disastrous effects of the Second World War were still very fresh in people's mind. And these disastrous effects included food shortages. Thus, the main objectives of the Common Agriculture Policy at the time was, first of all, to ensure food security, but also a fair standard of living for farmers, to support the farmers' incomes, to offer reasonable prices for agricultural products, and so on. These objectives have changed in time by adding new issues such as rural development and environmental goals. Thus, as we can see, all these goals of the Common Agriculture Policy are very important themes for the European society. At the same time, the formation and the continuation of the Common Agriculture Policy has created a group of vested interests which lobby hard for the continuation of the Common Agriculture Policy. Thus, I would say there are various aspects that explain the importance of this policy for the European Union.
There has been much discussion in the last decades about reforms to the Common Agriculture Policy. How much would you say has the Common Agriculture Policy really changed through these reforms?
I would say that through various reforms through the 90s and the 2000s, the Common Agriculture Policy has become a more efficient, a better targeted, and less distorting policy. Through these reforms, also more power has been given back to the member states in different ways, one by creating a second pillar, the rural development pillar, but also through the latest proposed reforms, the new governance model that will be implemented. At the same time, economic objectives are not the only objectives now for the Common Agriculture Policy, and the social and environmental aspects have become core objectives for this policy. Thus, I would say that we see a clear shift in the goals and the ways the goals are trying to be achieved through this policy.
Canada also has policies that strongly regulate the agricultural sector. What do you think are the most interesting comparison points between the EU and Canada when it comes to agricultural policy?
I'll mention here two, which I consider to be quite important. First is related to the multi-level structure of this policy. Even the Canadian agriculture policy is under the responsibility of both federal and provincial governments, which is a similar framework to the Common Agriculture Policy of the European Union, from the decision-making perspective and funding perspective. And the second point I would mention is the reforms that we see in Canada follow the same path as the European Union reforms as related to agriculture policy. We see a movement away from price support mechanisms, which are highly trade distorting, so both regions try to move away from such instruments. But also we see a move away from purely economic reasonings and the inclusion, as I already mentioned, of social and environmental goals. So we see similar paths in the two agriculture policies.
The Common Agriculture Policy remains quite contentious in the European Union. What are the main debates about the Common Agriculture Policy?
Well, I would mention three main debates. However, I would say that the most important one is related to the spending on the Common Agriculture Policy. This has been one contentious issue from the beginning of the Common Agriculture Policy. The spending on Common Agriculture Policy has declined from about 90% since its inception to about 31% nowadays of the EU budget. The member states have always been divided in two groups. One group, which are the large contributors to the EU budget, such as Germany, Denmark, Sweden, the UK up to a couple of years ago, were always against increasing spending for Common Agriculture Policy and pushing for a reduction in the spending. And after you have the second group, which was represented by the large beneficiaries from the agriculture spending, such as France, Ireland, Spain, and of course the Central and Eastern European countries after they joined the European Union, who pushed for maintaining the large spending for the common agriculture policy. Since Brexit happened, this debate has intensified, as the UK has been the second largest contributor to the EU budget, and thus the spending towards the CAP had to be reduced. So I would say that this would be probably one of the debates which was present in the European Union since the beginning of the common agriculture policy. A second debate is related to the fairness of spending. The spending of the common agriculture policy advantages the large farmers with the high yield in the favorable regions, in the most favorable regions, and thus the smaller and the poorer farmers are not benefiting as much from the spending of the common agriculture policy. A third debate, I would say, is probably related to the renationalization of the CAP from the decision-making and funding perspective. So I would say this would be the debates that are running within the European Union. At the international level, I assume the debate that was always present was related to the trade impacts of the common agriculture policy instruments. And that's why through the reforms, they become less distorting. However, there are still new instruments, such as geographical indicators, which are highly debated and contested by other countries.
In the so-called European Green Deal, the EU has expressed the ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050. How do you see the relationship between such environmental goals and concerns and the common agricultural policy?
So the goals, the sustainability goals of the European Green Deal have been included in the common agriculture policy. So I would say that the latest reform of the common agriculture policy, the known post-2020 CAP, is proposing more greening mechanisms. The new structure of the common agriculture policy includes three main components with the greening mechanism in mind. One is enhanced conditionality, so practically payments from the common agriculture policy are restricted by greening conditions, which continue the ones that were originally present in the common agriculture policy, but they add new ones to the list of restrictions. Also, the new common agriculture policy is proposing new schemes, new environmental and climate schemes under both pillars, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, which are voluntary schemes for farmers, and practically they can benefit from those schemes if they, of course, implement certain greening conditions. Also, I would point out another aspect. Under the new governance mechanism, the member states are required to take into account the European Green Deal targets in their national strategic plans for the agriculture. And thus, these plans will practically have to be assessed and approved by the European Commission. Thus, there is a push for the member states to always have these targets in mind when they think of their investments, for example, in a common agriculture policy.